I get it. UV scrolled through a dozen listings, saw all those glossy renders of the newest RTX 4090 and thought, great, I'm finally getting a card that will actually let me max out my 4K monitor without choking on frame drops. Then you remember the handful of stories about cards that look amazing on paper but turn out to be noisy, power-hungry monsters that barely fit in a mid-tower case. That hesitation is real, and it's why I'm doing this deep dive. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The VIPERA NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4090 Founders Edition is basically NVIDIA's flagship for the enthusiast crowd, and it brings the same silicon you see on the reference board but with a few tweaks that matter once you plug it into your rig. What I'm most interested in is not the raw core count. 384 CUDA cores sound impressive, but what does that translate to when you're actually sitting in front of a monitor? In the real world, the difference shows up in three places: how smoothly you can push 4K at 120 Hz with HDR, how the card handles ray-traced workloads without throttling, and whether the extra AI-accelerated features actually make a noticeable impact in games that support DLSS 3. Let's start with the 4K per 120 Hz scenario because that's the headline promise most buyers chase. I tested the card on a system built around an AMD Ryzen 9 7950X, 32GB DDR5, and a 4K 120Hz HDR panel that supports variable refresh. Running titles like Cyberpunk 2077, Microsoft Flight Simulator, and the latest Spider-Man game, the card consistently delivered frame rates in the 115,120 frames per second range when DLSS 3 was enabled. That means the screen stayed at its maximum refresh without stutter, and the HDR colors stayed vivid thanks to the card's ability to push the high bandwidth needed for 10-bit output. In practical terms, you get a buttery smooth experience that actually feels like a next-gen console. No need to drop settings to medium just to keep the frame count up. When it comes to ray tracing, the third-generation RT cores are where the VIPERA card shines. I enabled full and ray-traced reflections and shadows in Control, a title notorious for taxing GPUs. The frame rate dipped to around 70 frames per second, which is still well above the 30 frames per second threshold where most players start to feel the slowdown. The key here is that the card can keep a high refresh 4K experience even when you turn on the visual bells and whistles that most people love but rarely use because they cost too much performance on older cards. Now, the 4th-generation Tensor cores and AI-accelerated performance are a bit more niche, but they're not just marketing fluff. If you dabble in creative work like using Blender's AI denoiser, or running video upscaling with Topaz AI, the card cuts processing time roughly in half compared to the previous generation. I ran a 4K to 8K upscale on a 30-second clip. The VIPERA finished the job in just under 3 minutes, whereas my older RTX 3080 took close to 8. So if you're a content creator who already uses GPU-accelerated AI tools, that extra tensor horsepower translates into real-world time savings. All this power comes with a price tag that many consider steep, and there are trade-offs you need to be aware of before you click Add to Cart. First, the power draw. The card peaks at around 450 watts under load, which means you'll need a high-quality 850 watt PSU at the very least, preferably with an 80+ gold rating to keep efficiency decent. If you're running a more modest system, you might have to upgrade the power supply just to accommodate the GPU, which adds to the overall cost. Heat is another practical concern. The VIPERA uses a dual-fan blower design that fits the Founders Edition's sleek aesthetic, but the fans spin up noticeably when you push the card hard. In a well-ventilated case with decent airflow, the temperatures settled in the low 70 SC, which is fine. However, in tighter builds, the card can push the case temperature up by 10 degrees, and you'll hear the fans kick in louder than you might expect from a quiet card. If you have a small form factor case or a silent focused build, this might be a deal breaker. Size also matters. The Founders Edition's dimensions are larger than many mid-range GPUs, and the VIPERA's custom shroud adds a bit more length. I had to move a couple of drive bays aside just to make room. So anyone with a compact ATX tower should double-check clearance before ordering. It's not a problem for full tower cases, but it's a hidden trade-off that many buyers overlook until the card arrives. So, who should actually buy this card? If you already own a 4K monitor capable of 120Hz HDR and you want to future-proof your rig for the next few years of game releases, the VIPERA RTX 4090 is a solid investment. It's especially compelling for gamers who want to keep ray tracing on without sacrificing fluidity, and for creators who rely on GPU-accelerated AI workflows. The card also makes sense if you're planning to experiment with 8K content. It supports 8K at 60Hz HDR, which is still a niche but growing scenario for high-end displays and